The visit to Australia of Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono could be good news for the business community. The President says he sees a major role for Australia in Indonesia's modernisation program. But has diplomatic friction over asylum seekers and live cattle exports hurt relations with our 13th biggest trading partner? Well, Ian Satchell is the head of the Australia-Indonesia Business Council, and he joins me now from Darwin, where President Yudhoyono has been meeting Australian government ministers. Ian, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to be here.
There are scores of underage crew members from Indonesian people smuggling boats in detention in Australia, and President Yudhoyono wants them released. Would freeing them make life easier for Australian businesses in their dealings with the Indonesian government?
I don't think so. And talking to the President today, he didn't mention any of that in talking about business. He wants us to get on with the business of business, as indeed is challenging business from Australia and Indonesia to tell both governments about the opportunities and then what they can do, governments can do, to make business easier and to push us towards reaching a much more normal trade, investment and economic cooperation relationship.
Well, you must be encouraged by what you're hearing from the President.
Look, very encouraged. He was quite bullish about the prospects for business, wants Australia to be Indonesia's number 10 trading partner. We're well below that now. That's quite a modest target, actually, considering that we're talking about the two largest economies in Southeast Asia, and in terms of the Indonesian economy, it's going to be larger than Australia within the foreseeable future. So we should be very strong trading partners. We're not as strong as we should be, and government's thrown a challenge to business to tell governments what they need to do to enable us to really build that business-to-business relationship.
Well, we're the 13th largest trading partner with Indonesia at the moment, with a two-way trade of about $11 billion a year, but importantly that's growing at 15% a year. So is the top 10 a realistic goal?
Yes, it is. It's at least where the relationship should be. As I say, the two largest economies in Southeast Asia, quite complementary. We don't compete in many fields, but we have very complementary assets and skills. And Australia and Indonesia should be working much more closely together. That's our objective, and that's the challenge that President SBY has thrown to us. And following our meeting with him, business met this afternoon to talk in great detail about what are the sorts of things that we need to do over the next few months to reach agreement on what we want government to do and the sort of business opportunities that we really should be pursuing.
Well, it's interesting that Australia's 10th biggest trading partner is Malaysia, where we do $16 billion worth of trade every year. Given that Malaysia is a much smaller country than Indonesia, what does that say about how Australian business views Indonesia?
I think Australian business, since the Asian crisis and then the Indonesian economic meltdown in 1998, Australian business essentially withdrew. Certainly the larger companies did, a few smaller companies stayed there, but subsequently the rise of China has meant that Australian business, both mentally and indeed physically, have been flying over Indonesia on their way to elsewhere in Southeast Asia and in particular to China.
Australia's biggest exports to Indonesia are wheat and outbound tourism, and our biggest imports are crude petroleum and inbound tourism. Where do you see opportunities for increased trade?
Well, today we talked with the President and then on a business-to-business basis, Australian and Indonesian business, about some of those opportunities. We talked about great cooperation in education, training, professional development. Now, that's both capacity building and it's also really good business, because education in particular is one of Australia's major exports, Australia's largest service export. We talked about how we can develop cooperative supply chains, doing parts of a process in Australia, be it growing crops or animals, and parts of the process in Indonesia, or it might be manufacturing, or it might be services. So we talked about how the two countries can work together and to create an outcome, a trade outcome and economic outcome that's greater than the sum of the two parts. By working together and supplying third-party markets, the two countries can tap each other's potential, their comparative advantages, and really do some things that we probably haven't even thought of yet.
Well, just finally and very briefly, does the warm language that's coming from President Yudhoyono in your mind mean that any residual bitterness from the row over live beef exports has finally faded away?
Look, the way the live beef exports issue was handled dented Indonesia's confidence in Australia as a reliable supplier. But the conversation has changed now to how can Australia and Indonesia work together to build an integrated meat supply chain between the two countries, tapping the advantages in breeding and growing and fattening and slaughtering beef together. And so the President issued a direct challenge and opportunity to do that, in particular in the disadvantaged eastern Indonesia region. And I know that the cattlemen who were present at the lunch were very positive about that opportunity.
Ian Satchell, thank you very much for those thoughts.
Thank you, Andrew.